Welcome to Inflection Point Podcast, where we cultivate change from the inside out as we ponder the Cairo question. Will Cairo have to protest in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? We stand on the belief that dismantling racism goes beyond laws and legislation or politics and economics. Here, anti-racism activation is presented as an inside job where personal transformation and accountability impact social change. So take a seat at the anti-racism activation table with Inflection Point Podcast.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for the newest episode of Inflection Point Podcast. At Inflection Point Podcast, we are dedicated to the art of listening in authentic conversation. We challenge our audience to listen actively and intentionally for the purpose of awareness, understanding, and transformation. I am your host, Anita Russell, and here's a quick hello from co-hosts Mavis and Gail.
Hi there, I'm Mavis Bauman.
Hi, I'm Gail Hunter, and welcome.
Excellent, excellent. So once again, we have a pretty heavy topic that we're going to be discussing. So the theme of this week's episode is the sting of adultification bias felt by Black girls. So I'm going to start off with an article and a couple of different articles actually that talk about lived experiences with adultification bias. So one of the articles is entitled, "Why Won't Society Let Black Girls Be Children?" And so in this story, the woman's name is A. Rashawn Meadows Fernandez, and she is a writer, speaker, and activist who aims to bring awareness to health issues that disproportionately impact Black girls and women. And what she's writing about in this article is her experience when she was very young with the beginnings of adultification bias. Okay, so this is her story. Punishment was a hallmark of my educational experience. It started when my preschool teacher labeled me as manipulative and intentionally disruptive. She even tried to film me proving to my mother I was a problem. She never got the footage and accused me of pretending to behave at the sight of the camera. Although I was only 3 years old, she was convinced that my insistent hand-raising and refusal to sit still were signs that I was malicious instead of simply understimulated. As soon as I was old enough to understand what happened, my mom didn't hesitate to tell me the story each time I expressed self-doubt. She wanted me to understand I wasn't a problem. I was simply an engaged learner in a world where falling in line was more important than shining. My strengths were a threat. That experience set the tone for the rest of my schooling. Disruptive, talkative, and distraction were used almost as often as my name. And it meant being paddled a lot, calls home to my mother, and isolation from other students as punishment. So if you just kind of let that sink in, we're talking about the experience of a 3-year-old child, right? So let's continue. According to a report from the Department of Education Civil Rights Data Collection from 2013 to 2014, only 20% of female preschoolers were Black, but Black girls made up 54% of female preschool children with one or more suspensions. Because first of all, it's like absurd to me that a 3-year-old is getting suspended from school. Like, that's
Crazy.
somehow I just can't resonate. I just can't wrap my mind around that. So this is what she finally says. Now that I am a grown woman raising a Black child, I'm at a crossroads. How can I preserve my daughter's childhood while preparing her for a world that may judge her prematurely? So again, just let that sink in. So I'm going to share another experience with you. It is a sunny day in New Orleans, and a young girl is on her ride to school. Along the way, she can see glimmers outside the window, light reflecting off of barricades on either side of the street. And there are people standing behind them, tons of people. She thinks excitedly that today must be Mardi Gras. Why else would there be crowds in the street? But when the car stops, she hears the chanting. This crowd is not celebrating nor throwing their hands up in jubilee. They are screaming angrily, 2, 4, 6, 8. We don't want to integrate. So in case you haven't figured it out, this was Ruby Bridges. Federal marshals surrounded her on the morning of November 14, 1960, leading the small frame of 6-year-old Ruby Bridges through a sea of furious white faces. She was just a 6-year-old girl sent off to a new school and simply told to behave. And the title of this particular article is They Never Saw a Child. They never looked at Ruby Bridges and saw her as a child. So I have one more that I want to share with you, a little bit more recent. This actually happened in New Jersey, in North New Jersey community. A neighbor's called to police on a little Black girl while she sprayed lantern flies exposes a deeper problem, her mother says. On October 22nd, Bobby was walking through their Caldwell, New Jersey neighborhood, spraying a homemade mixture to kill lantern flies. So apparently she had been learning about lantern flies, how damaging they can be and all of that. So she had like her own little concoction, her own little mixture that she had put together so that she could kill the lantern flies. On this fall morning, she was excited to see if her mixture, that she had found the recipe on TikTok, whether or not that would actually work. So here's this little 9-year-old kid in her neighborhood, kind of doing a science experiment, if you will. So when her neighbor's call led to police stopping and questioning the child. Her mom was very confused and very upset. And in the call, the neighbor told, the neighbor is a white man, told the dispatcher, there's a little Black woman walking around spraying stuff on the sidewalks and trees on Elizabeth and Florence. I don't know what the hell she's doing. She scares me though. So Ruby Bridges was a 6-year-old. This little girl was a 9-year-old. And then the first one we read was a 3-year-old. And so this whole thing with adultification bias is something that really needs to be discussed. It needs to be understood in a very broad kind of way. And it needs to be tackled. Because as you're going to find out as we continue the conversation, it's very damaging. It's very damaging to people, to children. And so this whole idea of children not having the freedom and the liberty to just exhibit who they are as little kids without being labeled. Disruptive, can't sit still, all of these different labels that end up falling on children. And as we talk further into this episode, you'll hear a lot more about the research that confirms not only is adultification real, but that it's also very hurtful and it's very painful. And it's something that needs to be addressed, as does so many other things. So if you've been listening to us on our podcast, you know that we have addressed so many different issues. And it all just boils down to one thing. And that one thing is we have serious problems with racialized and institutionalized systems in this country. And they are hurting people, they are harming people, and they're damaging people. And we need to collectively come together as a country, as people, as individuals, and say, we have to stop. We have to stop. So Mavis, Gail, your comments so far?
It's the first thing comes to my mind is we have to wake up. I don't know if people know that they're doing this. How can a grown man call the police on what he believes to be a small woman in his neighborhood? You know what I mean? The racism there is so deep that we're numb to it. We just don't even realize the thought process we're going through. And the idea that racialized response hurts a child is just sickening and so saddening, because those experiences, Gail will back this up, but those experiences when you're little, you don't forget them. You don't forget being 3 and somebody struck you because you were giggling, you know? And so I just, the fact that the racism is behind all of what you just described this is, again, a crisis. It's urgent. We have to respond to it.
Yeah, when anything affects children like that, we all have to come together. Because it really stop for children and for the older children, for the adolescents, for the adults. I mean, we all have to come together to find ways to stop this, to become more enlightened, more aware, more conscious, so that implicit bias is no longer implicit. It just is more consciously aware. And so, because you can't change what you don't see and what you don't know. So we have a responsibility to ourselves and to the human race, to be able to stand in that place of authenticity and honesty with ourselves and look in that mirror and look within ourselves, and even in the uncomfortable, painful, difficult places, to be able to say, wow, I didn't realize that I felt that way. Or I didn't realize that I was looking at that child or that person that way. But our words and our behavior and our reaction to others impacts them, just as theirs impact and imprint us, right? And there's a parent around that would want their 3-year-old to be talked to or reacted to in the way that little 3-year-old was, right? Just for being bright and curious and not being stimulated enough because it's Black.
Yeah, it's just really, really tough to swallow. And those were just some stories of younger children. It actually gets worse as the girls get older and their bodies start to develop, and the types of assumptions that people begin to make are just, in some instances, they're just unreal. So I think at this point, we're going to I'm going to pass the mic rather over to Mavis, and she's going to talk about research that confirms Black girls feel the sting of adultification bias. And she's going to talk about a particular study that was done that kind of confirms what we're talking about here.
Right, right. This is so fascinating. It was a study done in 2017 by Georgetown Law and Poverty Center, I believe. They interviewed 325 adults with specific questions. And I think the questions are really informative. The adults were from around the country, different ethnic and racial backgrounds, educational backgrounds. But the questions were around children from ages 4 to 14. So there were the same questions were asked for both Black children and white children. So an example is, how often do Black females take on adult responsibilities? So a person answering that survey would probably, well, the results show that they would give a different answer for Black children versus Black girls versus white girls. Another question, how much do Black females seem older than their age? How much do Black females need to be supported? How much do they need to be comforted? How independent are they? How knowledgeable are Black girls about sex? So this study shows that, you know, in response to those questions, Black girls need because they are adultified, they need less nurturing, they need less protection, to be supported less, to be comforted less, that they are more independent, that they know more about adult topics, and they know more about sex. This is really fascinating because these are all based on perceptions, racialized perceptions of young Black girls. And there was even a piece that said that a young Black girl might be perceived as knowing more because she was exposed more. So not only do they look at her and make a judgment, they make an assumption about where she lives and who she lives with, and is she experiencing things in her neighborhood? Is she seeing violence? Well, if she's seeing violence, she's not going to care if I grab her arm and drag her out of the classroom. You know, this is nothing to her. And so this whole idea of adultifying Black girls in particular robs them of that, as Anita was saying, that freedom to just be a child, and silly and goofy and explorative and creative. There's so much in our society for females to be pushed down, to be shamed, to be clipped in so many different ways. We have to look a certain way. We have to, our skin has to be a certain color. So this is kind of a double whammy for Black girls. There's the effect of adultifying Black girls. I think Anita was talking about this too, is that not only is it harmful to their spirits, but it produces negative outcomes for education and also juvenile justice systems. They're more likely to end up in the juvenile justice system because they were punished early on. And, you know, I always try and put myself in the position of that child. And I'm thinking, well, I'm sure I did this as a little one myself. I fought viciously when I thought that I was unjustly treated. And you can imagine how a child, a little Black girl, might develop that behavior if she was consistently punished for raising her hand, asking a question, giggling, whatever. And it's just no surprise that there is, you know, that a rage can build up in kids, and then it's a vicious cycle after that. I'm going to ask you to comment on that part a little bit, Anita. But like I say, just being treated that way as a young child forms your personality and your reactions as you grow up. There were they highlighted three characteristics of youth that differentiate children from adults. So there's a lack of maturity. This is how we decide in the legal system. How do we distinguish a child from an adult? There's a lack of maturity. There's more impetuous decisions. There's greater susceptibility to negative influences, and they're still developing character and personality. If you disregard all of those assessments of what it is to be a child and treat a child as if they were an adult, I mean, I can only imagine how confusing that would be to a child. And I've even said myself, I haven't raised children myself, but my siblings have been good about filling me in on some things, because sometimes I will want to say the logical thing that an adult feels to a child. And she has stopped me many times and says, don't hurt that 4-year-old, you know, with your 40-year-old mind. I'll never forget that. It's true that we just have to think protection to protect this little one that really has, you know, is just finding out who they are as an individual. Then I did listen to a number of videos that were young Black girls talking about their life, their lived experiences. And if you can look for them online under this study, Girlhood Interrupted, they are so precious because they're just like the videos of any other teenager. They were mostly teenagers in this case. But one young girl said, I don't want to be perceived as a threat just because I'm Black. And, you know, that was something that as a white person, I never, ever had to even think of. I never had to have fear of punishment because of my race at all. And I don't know, it just really struck me because she's just a child. But anyway, listening to those videos, and then there was a lovely photographer on set that said, you know, just be yourself. And the things that came out of these young girls, it's a look inside to what the life of a little Black girl might be like. If you're white, look at those photographs, look at those videos, hear what they have to say. Because I think I've felt it in myself. It just comes up that I think that there's not good discipline in the family or something, you know, when and all of the racialized socialization I've been exposed to comes up. I will never do that again, because now I know, look at this child, look at this person. It is a child. So many thoughts, ladies? Want to chime in on that? I may come up with some more if you have some questions here.
Well, it's always amazing to me that adults who started off as 1, 2, and 3-year-old children, and now we're in the adult phase of our lives, look at children and not just be able to understand. The kid has literally been on the planet for 36 months. It took you 36 years to learn everything that you know, to learn how to be around other people, to mature, to grow, to think, to analyze, to create. It took you your entire lifetime to get to where you are as an adult, no matter what, whether it's 25, 35, 45, 55, or 65.
Right.
But you have the audacity to look at a human being who has literally been on the planet for 36 months and expect them to be able to rise up to this place and meet you where you are, that's a direct violation.
Yeah.
It should always be about you come down to the level of this child and meet them where they are. That's one of the things that I do with my grandson. I've said this to you with Cairo. I always get down at his level so that we can see eye to eye without him having to stretch his neck up at me. So I get down. His parents will do the same thing. We get down so that we're eye level with him. But it's not just about being physically eye level with him. It's about mentally, emotionally, everything.
Yes.
Just understanding that this 3-year-old human being does not have the capacity to think, behave, believe, act, whatever beyond their 36 months.
Right.
You can see this is something that really, really gets under my skin.
Yeah. But with the perception that white people might have of Black children, it seems to me that that's multiplied.
Oh, yes.
Because I'm just so afraid of saying this in the wrong way, but it's that much more intense because there's an unconscious need for separating yourself from that person who's different.
Now, you know, I'm going to interrupt you right now.
Interrupt me.
You know, we talk, it's racism.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
racism.
I was getting there. It was a long explanation, but you're right. It's racism.
It's just racism.
To want to separate from that child, to want to get
Right.
that child out of your classroom, to not even try and understand why that child is behaving that
To
way.
not even see that child as a child.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
You're
racism.
absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
And that was the title of the Ruby Bridges article.
Mhm.
They never saw a child. I mean, just
Oh,
like 45 words, just let that sink in.
With
They
all those people
saw a child.
screaming and yelling and protesting, and they never saw this little girl.
what their
It's-
actions might do to that child looking out the bus
Sure.
window.
Yeah. The trauma that would have caused her to experience, right?
Yeah.
And
And
this
the
is all on her shoulders.
The irony of it is that Ruby Bridges became an activist.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who knows what she may have become
Mhm.
if that was not her
Oh,
experience.
right.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
I mean,
How that
who knows?
limited
I'm not
her.
saying, you know, I don't mean that in any type of
Right.
derogatory way or anything like that, but who knows?
Right.
Yeah. I just hope that everybody who's listening just takes a moment to think about how they think about Black girls in every way. What do you think about how they dress, about how they walk, about how they do their hair? What are you thinking?
Right.
Are you appreciating them? Are you delighting in them? Are you judging them and being racist towards them? Even if you're not expressing it like the nice white ladies don't. Think about what you're thinking.
Yeah, it's almost time for us to take a break. And really, Mavis, what you're describing is the thing that we talk about all the time in doing this work is critical self-reflection.
That's right.
Mhm.
That's right.
It's not about you trying to figure out this individual, this child, or whomever Black person, no matter how old or young they are. It's about you delving within yourself and dissecting
Yeah.
out those things that are causing you to behave in the way that you're behaving. It is not inherently connected to the person. That's
No,
just
it's not about the child.
right. That's your outward projection,
All projection.
but
Right.
it's what's going on inside of you.
It's what
Yeah,
we carry.
we're gonna
with
take
us.
we'll take a quick break, Gail, and then it'll be your turn to talk, and then we'll continue the conversation.
Okay.
So welcome back. You are listening to Inflection Point podcast on Transformation Talk Radio. And our topic for today is the sting of adultification bias felt by Black girls. And at this point, we're going to pass the baton over to Gail, and she's going to talk to us about adultification bias studies that have been done in Allegheny County. And Allegheny County is in Pittsburgh, and Gail and I both live in Pittsburgh. So this work is pretty close to us, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. I have to tell you, I was beyond shocked when I read the statistics of the data from this study. So Sarah Goodkind is associate professor of social work, sociology, gender, sexuality, and women's studies at the University of Pittsburgh. And her research focuses mostly on programs and services for young people, particularly those in the juvenile justice system and child welfare systems. She's always been interested in how understandings of the gender, race, ethnicity, class, sexuality, and age shape service design and delivery, and how these in turn affect the mental health and well-being of young people, parents, and staff members. So much of her work has been focused on programs for girls in the juvenile justice system. And she's been involved with efforts to improve the system and prevent and develop alternatives to girls' involvement with it. The results of this study, as I said, are beyond shocking. They reveal that adults perceive Black girls as less innocent than white girls as young as 5 to 9 years of age. The most significant differences in participants' perceptions of Black girls' innocence appeared in the 10 to 14 year age group, with significant differences also apparent in ages group 5 to 9 and 15 to 19. Adultification bias, what is it? It's a perception that Black girls, as has been said, are less innocent and more adult-like than their white peers of the same age. Adults believing Black girls from 5 to 19 need less nurturing, less protection, less support, and comfort than white girls of the same age. And that Black girls are more independent, know more about adult topics, and know more about sex than white girls. And so these are the assumptions that were coming out in her study. So she showed certainly the inequities and the disparities that Black girls experience in several social systems. Black girls in the United States are 5 times more likely than white girls to be suspended from schools, often for subjective behaviors. I'll talk more about that. They're often pushed out of the schools and onto the pipeline to the juvenile justice system at a very young age. In fact, Pittsburgh Black girls are more likely than their white counterparts to face harsh disciplinary policies like suspension, expulsion, and disorderly conduct charges. The oppression of Black girls, she found, exemplifies in the national statistics on their victimization and system involvement is mirrored in local Western Pennsylvania. And these statistics that motivate the local service providers and system professionals and academics to form what's called Black Girls Equity Alliance. And they've continued doing research and studying with this and providing services. The particular experience of these Black girls are often rendered invisible, so you don't see it, even by those invested in the social justice, who are focusing on either the experiences of the girls, which too often becomes the experiences of the white girls, or the experiences of Black children, which too often becomes the experiences of Black boys. So Black girls have unique experiences of marginalization and racial and gender frameworks often missed when these forms of oppression are examined separately. So it's really important to for what she believes is to focus on these girls. Black girls are 10 times more likely to be referred to the juvenile justice system than white girls, according to the report from Allegheny County Juvenile Probation Office. Even though there are no meaningful differences in the types of behaviors that led to juvenile court referrals among Black and white girls. And when you have numbers this high, that's not just one child or one group of kids. That has to indicate a systemic issue going on. In Allegheny County, Black girls are 13 times more, these are the statistics that they found, are more likely than white girls to be arrested by the Pittsburgh police. They're 5 times more likely than white girls to receive a summary citation from the Pittsburgh police. They are 10 times more likely than white girls to be referred to the juvenile justice system. And the juvenile justice referral rate for Black girls in Allegheny County is 50% higher than Black girls nationwide. But the referral rate for white girls in Allegheny County is 50% lower than the national rate. Now just think about that. All right.
Wow.
Pittsburgh schools' referral rate of Black girls to law enforcement is higher than 99% of similar US cities, 99%. What's going on here? Obviously, a great deal of systemic racism. Pittsburgh Public Schools has 64 referrals per 1,000 Black girls enrolled versus 12 per 1,000 white girls enrolled. And meaning that the Pittsburgh Public Schools refer Black girls to law enforcement at over 5 times the rate it refers white girls. And nationally, the school referral rate of Black girls to law enforcement is just 4 out of every 1,000 and 2 out of every 1,000 white girls. Those are statistically significant differences in those numbers. And similar cities like Cleveland, Detroit, and Cincinnati all have much lower referral rates. So 60% of Black girls' juvenile justice referrals in Allegheny County in 2018 were for school-related offenses. I put that in quotes. While for white girls, just 38% of referrals were related to school issues. So in 2017, the number one source of Black girls' referrals to juvenile justice in Allegheny County were the Pittsburgh Public Schools. Whereas for Black boys, it was the Pittsburgh Police, and white girls and boys, it was the district magistrates usually that were referring them. Black students, they found, are more likely than white youth to be disciplined at school for subjective behaviors. For example, in Allegheny County in 2017 to 18 school year, the Black youth were approximately 10 times more likely to be suspended for conduct as white youth were. These statistics are pretty incredible and sad. She went on to study about poverty and how living in poverty increases a girl's risk of abuse and exploitation, which also increases involvement in the child welfare system. The researchers found that Black girls living in impoverished neighborhoods experience depression more often than white counterparts and have less access to treatment. Right? Inequities that Black girls face in various systems are interrelated and compounding, all of which are magnified by implicit and explicit bias and the adultification of Black girls. Goodkind described disorderly conduct, and this is what most of these kids were referred for, as a catch-all charge that includes things like excessive noise, obscene gestures or language, and lots of other typical normal teenage or child behaviors. And almost all the Black girls and women that they talked to said they'd experienced this adultification bias as children. And they overwhelmingly agreed that it led teachers and other adults to treat them more harshly and hold them to higher standards than white girls. Black girls are also more likely than white girls to experience teen dating violence, rape, and other violent threats or injuries, and not being supported or any discipline taken for the perpetrator, even when it's happening in school. There's one part of the article that they did that there was a young Black girl, middle schooler, I think, was being sexually harassed all day in school by these two black kids, and told the teacher, and the teacher did nothing. And so she took out a pencil and she poked one of the kids. They arrested her for using a weapon of destruction, right? And finally, somebody said, wait a second, a pencil is not a weapon. And that what was not happening was that this child was not being cared for, protected, and the boys that were taunting her and sexually harassing her were not being disciplined. And they left, they got off free. The racialized and gendered stereotypes about Black girls, including the adultification that many experience, may cause these teachers to label them as oppositional, defiant, insubordinate, and disrespectful. But their white counterparts are not being labeled that way. The higher suspension of Black girls from school influences their academic achievement. It influences their self-esteem. They're often tracked into lower level sections of courses such as math and science and encouraged to excel more in sports and music. The school to prison pipeline has been so well documented for Black boys, but less so for Black girls. It is notable that 60% of Black girls' juvenile justice referrals in Allegheny County in 2018 were for school-related offenses, while for white girls, there's only 38% referrals based on school-related offenses. Well, I can keep going on and on, but I'll look at the time. Complicating the problem further, Black girls in Allegheny County are less likely to benefit from any diversion programs, with only 40% of Black girls diverted from formal processing in the juvenile system. So many of these girls on their way are offered different diversion programs so that they can eliminate the fines and eliminate the complications that can come from these accusations. And what often happens for these kids is that they're suspended, or they are placed with a large fine and they can't afford to pay the fine. So then they get fines on top of fines, which sounds very much like Black codes did back after, right, in Reconstruction. So they get trapped in that system, and not just labeled, but trapped in it. And there's a learned helplessness, I believe, that begins to happen. You know, of course, as it happens to anybody that has been traumatized or abused or repressed in those ways over a consistent period of time. So the Black girls are experiencing numerous interrelated systemic inequities that cannot be addressed by just supporting individual girls. It has to be addressed by requiring organized collective advocacy for major structural change.
Really,
I'm going to stop at that point.
Yeah.
So we can
I just
talk
want to say
about that.
that is a really powerful statement, what you just said, because we keep emphasizing over and over and over again, these are systemic.
Right. And they
These
are
systemic problems. These are systemic issues. And if we don't tackle them at a systemic level, at an institutional level, then how in the world are we supposed to solve this?
That's right.
Yeah.
You can't.
Right. And when I say we, I'm not even talking about me as a Black person. I'm talking about people who perpetuate the system, the institutionalization, and just keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. This is so harmful. It's incredibly harmful. And one of the things that we've said in so many episodes, we like repeat ourselves, racism is a disruptor of health and wellness. And what adultification shows us is that it begins with our children.
And very young children, not just the teenagers. No.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Gail, was there anything in that study that indicated different results when the teachers were Black versus white? In other words, was there more of a... No,
it didn't indicate that in the study, as far as what I read. That would be an interesting fact to look at. I would hope there would be a difference.
I would hope there would be.
It's similar to what happened, right? But it's that mentality that begins to develop, and so even somebody as Black could still have that same bias and that same perception and projection onto a student, right? Just because they're collectively believing this. It's
okay.
I don't know. It would be an interesting study, but I don't know.
Point.
I don't know if it would make it. I don't know if it makes a difference. I would hope it would, but my fear is that it doesn't.
I also wanted to reemphasize something you said, that of course Black girls are viewed as more adult than their white peers. They may be more likely to be disciplined for their actions, and yet they are also more vulnerable to the discretionary authority of teachers and law enforcement than their adult counterparts.
They really are.
So it's just layer on layer of abuse, effectively.
These are the types of factors that can cause a person to shut down.
Yeah, sure.
Completely.
Sure. Yeah. Give up.
Constantly told that you're being disruptive, you're being this, and then eventually if you run out of ideas of how can I counter what this person is saying to me, but the problem is the issue is not originating from you. The issue is originating for this person, again, projecting something onto you that isn't necessarily valid. And that question, Mavis, that you just asked is a really, really good question, because especially when you think about it in terms of sexuality, right? And when girls start to develop, it's almost like people make this automatic assumption that because a person, a young girl is starting to develop, that all of a sudden now she's like a sexual being. No, she's just a kid. She's just a kid. And, she might, her body's starting to change and, all of these things. And I think because when our bodies change, it's so visible, right? It's so visible.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that our brain is matching what our physiology is, right?
Absolutely.
Or our awareness or consciousness,
absolutely.
Or interest or desire.
Exactly. Right. Intentions, anything. Yeah.
Exactly. The point being, it's people that are now looking at this person and making these assumptions. And, when it comes to the sexual aspect of it, even 5-year-old little girls get molested by fully adult men. And it's like, at what point do we just say, okay, time out? What's up with these men?
Right.
To say the least. Yeah.
Yes.
What are you thinking?
Right.
Exactly.
What are you thinking?
And you look at these younger girls, schoolish girls, and then the way they might dress, but that's the style, right? That does not mean that they're stepping out and being a sexual being. They're just kids and they just want to fit in. They just want to look like everybody else, but still be unique enough within themselves.
Right.
But it's a perception of others and the projection onto them. That's the issue. It's not the issue with the girls and their clothes. It's the issue with the adults projecting onto them and interpreting that.
Right. Exactly. Because we don't come into the world with this like magic thing that we can do. We can just make men crazy. We don't come into the world like that. That check yourself.
That's right. Exactly.
Check yourself.
It's not an invitation. And so it's not about fixing that child or fixing that outfit or fixing that whatever. It's about fixing the systems, right?
Right. That's exactly the point.
Fixing the systems so they do support and nurture these kids instead of set these kids up, right? To not succeed, but to fail. And to feel shame. And that's the worst part, is the shame that's instilled in them.
That's why I like, and you've heard me talk about Jackson Katz multiple times. That's why I like the work that he does, because he really addresses the issue of gender.
Right.
Really adjusts, and the other gentleman, I think his name is Tony Porter, that does the whole thing with the man box and A Call to Men is his website. Right. But those are two individuals that I know of that fully head on address the sort of that culture that we have towards women, and looking at it not something that women are forcing, but it's men have to be held accountable and responsible for their own for their own actions, their own behaviors. And you can't just say, oh, she had a skirt on and
not me, not my fault.
Yeah.
Right.
Again, it's just this myriad thing that we're confronting here. And that's why I always feel like if we can solve the problem of institutionalized racism and really begin to understand racial equity and all of that, and really implement things that bring about racial equity, these other things will start to fall into place.
They will.
Absolutely.
So interconnected.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like when Julie Crenshaw and, critical race theory, and they talk about intersectionality, that's real.
It is very real.
That's real.
Yeah. Gail, when you were talking about subjective behaviors, were you referring to the adult's subjective assessment of a misbehaving child?
Well, they were observing behaviors that would be what would be considered in a subjective form, such as if kids were talking or if they were they're talking loudly, or if they heard a child say no to somebody, or if that all those behaviors can be looked at subjectively and misinterpreted or interpreted differently.
Okay,
based
by the
on
adult.
bias of the individual observing.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so you see more girls are getting referred for oppositional defiant, or for whatever the behavior might be. That's really, maybe they're just learning they're just trying to protect themselves. Maybe it's just a survival skill. Maybe it's just what's happened to them earlier in the day. But nobody's inquiring. They're just judging and putting a label on them.
They're not deserving of protection or nurturing. Just leaves me cold. Like what you're saying, Anita, if just those 2 levels of treatment were adjusted, girls would start to have a different experience. I mean, this is doable. This is doable.
It's definitely doable. Right. So I wanted to share an experience that my daughter, one of my daughters had when they were like in elementary school, and they were, it was in the summertime, and they were doing summer camp, but they had summer camp at their regular school, right? And I think like maybe once a week they would take the kids over to the city pool so they could, have fun and swim and splash around and all that good stuff that you want to do in the summertime. There's one particular time when they had gone, one of the boys behaved inappropriately towards my daughter and tried to pull off her bathing suit top, and she slugged him. But the teacher reprimanded my daughter and not the boy. Right. So then when my daughter comes home, and you know how, Gail, when your kids come in the house, something's wrong.
Immediately, right.
That's
energy.
Yeah. And so I proceeded to talk with her and find out what the situation was. It's like, okay. So I called the teacher on the phone and had a conversation with him. And I said, now I'm going to tell you what this looks like from my perspective. This boy was on the verge of sexually assaulting my daughter. So is this really the path that you want to go down? Or can we take another look at this? Because you punished my daughter without punishing the person who touched her inappropriately. And I have always taught my daughter she has a right to defend herself. So you tell me, I'm giving you the choice. Which road do you want to go down?
That's good.
And obviously
how did he respond?
Well, no, we're not. I'm sorry. Because that's the thing. Sometimes it just takes, you got to point this stuff out.
Right. Look at it from a different perspective, right?
Point it out.
Yeah. It's all perspective taking. Yeah.
I'll bet he never forgot that.
Exactly.
No, but it's so important to just shift your vision for a moment and look at it through a different lens. And what's there? What do you notice?
Right. So we literally have about 2.5 minutes of the program to go. And one of the things that I wanted to call out is that I found this website. It's a storytelling gallery. And it's a storytelling gallery of Black women and girls who are sharing their stories about adultification bias. The website is endadultificationbias.org. So I'm going to say that again. endadultificationbias.org.
That's good, yeah.
Yeah, so final thoughts, ladies?
I think it's great. I'm going to look it up because I think that's something we all can look up and realize. It's going to help us internally look in that mirror, right? And say, am I looking at it that way? Am I perceiving that 12-year-old, that 8-year-old this way? Yeah.
Well, and that shadow of an adult woman behind a child has been on our logo, our banner since day one. And I have to say, I really did not understand that until really delving into this.
Yeah.
It's so doable. We just have to look at these things. It changes you instantly. So I just appreciate the journey so much.
No, I know.
And I mean, admittedly, it does take work to do
does.
this. But the first step, what we always talk about, courage, conversation, relationship, and accountability. You
Right.
got to muster up the courage to step into the conversation. Because once you start stepping into the conversation, you could build a different type of relationship with people. And once you start building those different types of relationships, you now are armed with the ability to hold yourself accountable for your words, actions, and behaviors that come out of you into the world.
Yeah,
This is not rocket science.
No.
exactly.
It is critical self-reflection.
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah,
And it's hard and it's possible. And we
Yes,
all
exactly.
need to look in that mirror and do that.
Exactly.
Take the step and do it.
Exactly. So I think we are pretty much done at this point. So to the audience, I just want to thank you for joining us for yet another provocative conversation on Inflection Point Podcast here on Transformation Talk Radio. And as a reminder, we are here every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time and 6 p.m. Eastern time. And we will see you at the next episode. Thank you for listening to Inflection Point Podcast, where our mantra is cultivating change from the inside out. The journey towards anti-racism and social change doesn't stop here. Truth, reconciliation, and healing come from ongoing, open, honest, and deliberate conversations. Continue to dive in and deconstruct your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs as we band together to manifest social change. Tune in to Inflection Point Podcast every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on TransformationTalkRadio.com for more conversations about how we can cultivate change from the inside out.